Hey, it's Dave from Sage Garden, and I wanted to talk about bringing lavender and rosemary plants indoors through the winter months. This is a category of plants that we love to grow through our sunny, beautiful summers. They flourish here, but it can be very difficult to bring them indoors and have them survive through to the next year because of our dry, kind of interrupted winter situation indoors. So I'm going to run through some tips to help you with bringing them indoors. It can definitely be done, but there's a few keys to success here. So we're going to start by talking about variety selection. There's definitely a range of hardinesses for lavender in particular. Rosemaries tend to be from zone 7 to 9 essentially, so that would be something that could survive outdoors like in Victoria, British Columbia, maybe even parts of southern Ontario. But in our prairie climate, the rosemary definitely can't survive outdoors. For lavender, there's certain varieties like Hidcote and Munstead lavenders which could survive in our zone 3 winters outdoors. But as a rule of thumb, we're talking about plants that are Mediterranean, so they're from zones like say 5 to 9. They're used to having a bit of a winter situation, and they like to have contrast between summer and winter. But as a rule, you can try to find varieties that are higher zoned, and they will do better indoors. So for example, some of the Spanish style lavenders, Portuguese lavenders like this Q Red, they're a little bit better adapted to growing indoors simply because they come from warmer climates and they're used to more of a year-round growing situation. So look for the high zone varieties. That said, a lot of our favorite lavenders, or ones you'll find at garden centers, are not high zone varieties, and so we have to plan pretty carefully to bring these indoors. The first thing I'll say is the location is key. Lavender and rosemary need to have a cool location indoors through the wintertime. They need to also have brightness. So how do we reconcile those two things? If during the day it's a location that gets nice and sunny and so it warms up as a result of that, that is perfect. But at nighttime, we want to have it cool off. So if we were hanging out reading a book or something, we'd want to put a sweater on, we'd wrap a little blanket over ourselves. Maybe this is in front of a patio door, maybe it's in a foyer or a cooler sunroom. But lavender and rosemary will not thrive at average room temperatures indoors through the winter months. They need to have contrast, and they do not like the hot forest air that comes from our heating vents. So it's very important you find an alternative location for them. The second thing is timing. These plants should come indoors well before they show signs of stress from the outdoor cooler temperatures of fall. Definitely get them indoors by the end of September, but earlier is even better. If we get hit by a frost, you'll notice that lavender and rosemary look just fine after the sun has come out and the plants look just perfectly as if they hadn't had any frost at all. But it does send a signal to the plant metabolically to kind of go into a dormant phase. And then if you bring them into your warmer, drier, less bright indoor situation, it adds to the stress. So we want to bring them in before they've had persistent cool temperatures. The third thing is, when you bring your plants indoors, you want to give them a good snipping back, and this can really be illustrated with your rosemary here. You want to take some nice sharp scissors and go through and cut the stem tips off. Go ahead and make some rosemary potatoes or something like that. You can do the same with your lavender, but you want to work your way through the whole plant, making sure you get as many of those stem tips trimmed off. The reason for doing this is that the plants will then grow new stems. They'll divide out and grow new little branches, and that new growth will only have known indoors and will be much less stressed, and it'll be better adapted to your indoor growing situation versus the plant material that has known the outside conditions. So that's very important. Be meticulous with this. Cut as many of the stem tips, and we're talking about just the very tip off. Use nice sharp scissors. Use some rubbing alcohol as you work your way around the plant, just to make sure that you're making clean cuts and not spreading any kind of disease or anything like that. Another thing about this time of the year is you could go ahead and repot your plants. We sometimes hear that fall is not the right time for repotting, but in fact, if you've got a root-bound plant that's been growing happily all summer long, it's the perfect time to repot it. That again stimulates the plant to want to come indoors and put on new growth, which is exactly what we want it to do. We don't want it to go into a dormant phase as much as we can avoid. So go a couple of pot sizes bigger. Avoid any kind of container that doesn't have drainage holes. You cannot put rocks in the bottom and expect it to survive. Lavender and rosemary require drainage holes, absolutely imperative. They also do not do well in pots that have ceramic glaze on them, or a glaze over the ceramic. I would say a plain ceramic pot or a plastic pot with really good drainage is your best option for these plants. It really is important to have drainage. We use a potting soil that we add about 20% sea soil compost to, which builds some nutrition in, has nice structure to it. It's very, very helpful. So you want to make sure that you use a well-drained potting soil, and by adding that compost, you're building some nutrition in, which is going to help carry your plants through the winter. We've really seen that make a difference. When we see a lot of lavender and rosemary plants, the ones that have a compost-based soil always do better. The last thing to say is that you do want to feed your plants a little bit through the winter months. An all-purpose organic will never burn your plants. We recommend using this at about half strength, half as often. So it's going to be monthly, about a teaspoon and a liter of water when it comes to the Evolve Organic All-Purpose. Very easy to do, almost negligible cost. It's going to last a long time, 100 doses from one bottle. But if you apply that to your soil, it ensures your plants have that basic nutrition required, and it avoids that problem of them getting to about March and then they just run out of steam. Especially later as we head into spring, the plants are noticing that light levels are going up and they're just going to be needing to have that nutrition in there. So make sure you do fertilize a little bit through the winter months. It could make all the difference. So there we go, right location, cool but bright, timing, earlier the better. Upsize the containers if you need to. Potting soil that has some compost built into it. Snip back the tips of the plant. Get it into its nice location, and then make sure you're feeding it about half strength, half as often, right through the winter months. Those are some steps you can take to have successful indoor lavender and rosemary. Hope that helps. If you have any questions about this, you can certainly drop by Sage Garden. We're open right through the winter. If you want to keep these plants more actively growing, a strategy would be to use simple fluorescent full spectrum grow lights. That can make a huge difference as well. You can have a cool location with those lights. There's so many ways that could be helpful. If you have any questions about this, please drop by. We'd love to help out.